Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We're so glad you are joining us this evening for our webinar focused on interactive read-alouds in kindergarten. We'll start with a land acknowledgement by acknowledging that ONLIT's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live.
I am Monette Smith. I'm currently a grade 1 teacher, but I have spent time in kindergarten, and it's something that I do hope to go back to at some point. I'm at the mercy of my principal at this point of where he puts me. But thank you so much for joining us on this busy winter January cold night. Here's a couple of the things that we're going to be looking at this evening. We're going to be talking about interactive read-alouds as well as how they'll fit into the new curriculum for next year. And we'll be looking at the basics of those read-alouds, the text selection, the vocabulary, effective routines and techniques to use them in your classroom. I'm also going to show you a worked example of something that I did with an actual kindergarten classroom, and I'm hoping that we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. Una is going to be keeping an eye on the chat, so if you do have a question that comes up, feel free to pop it in the chat, and then we can chat about it at the end. Okay, so let's get started. So interactive read-alouds and the new curriculum. When we think about the benefits of reading to kids, there's really you cannot argue with it, right? We've got the ability to expose our students to more complex language structures. The words and the expressions and the way that we are talking when we're reading a book is going to be different than what we do with young children. We know that reading to kids can support their vocabulary, development. We know that it builds their background knowledge. We also know that there's a lot of socio-emotional benefits to reading to kids. There's a lot of research that supports that reading to students helps build and support their self-regulation. It also provides that opportunity for interpersonal compassion through the sharing of stories. There's also physiological benefits of being read to, that it can decrease their heart rate, it increase their oxygen levels. And then there's also the idea that reading to our kids can actually strengthen their story grammar. So this is a brand new term for me, literally from yesterday, but this idea of story sense, of how stories are told, the beginning, middle, and end, these can all be done by reading aloud to our kids. Many of us are probably familiar with this image at this point. This is Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, and it shows through a visual that interweaving of language comprehension and word recognition and how those lead to skilled reading with great comprehension. And when you think about the benefits of reading aloud to kids, you can see that a lot of those elements are in that upper strand of Scarborough's reading rope we can hit on while we are reading to our students. We need to remember that in our younger grades, we will have some kids that are reading independently, but for the most part, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, they're not reading complex enough texts to think super deeply about what they're reading. And so when we read aloud to our kids, we actually are bypassing the need for the students to have that well-developed word recognition on their own. Thinking again about our MLL learners, or thinking about students with processing needs, reading to them helps them to be part of that reading comprehension and helps them to develop all of these skills. We're not always in control of our day, but I do try and find time to read to them at any point in the day. So MJ is going to be kind enough to put this in the chat. This comes from the lovely Kate Wynn. This idea that we can read chapter books to kindergarten students. She uses that her snack time for doing that, and that's something that I started to do. I like to call this the no strings attached reading, right? This is about the joy of reading. They're often doing something while I am reading to them. Like I said, doing the snack. I do this in my grade 1 classroom. It's really about modeling strategies, modeling effective fluent reading. In my class, the kids get to vote on the books that they are being read to at this time. So they get really, really excited and really into the options. These are some of the suggestions that were on Kate's blog and some that we use in our class. Again, thinking about the representation of your students. I also like to make sure that I make time for knowledge building, right? Using a read aloud is a great way to help build knowledge with our students. I do this through nonfiction decodables. I use websites like ReadWorks, which you can use and tailor for the subjects and the ages that you are working with, and also things like Epic. My library at school is still a relatively new. We're only about 7 or 8 years old. So our nonfiction collection is still kind of small. So if I need to, I can use Epic to help me build knowledge through a read aloud. And of course, what you are all here today for is that interactive read aloud. And when we think about doing interactive read alouds, the reason why I started was that I really wanted to be able to develop their listening comprehension. I wanted a way to focus on the vocabulary knowledge. And of course, I wanted to be able to use different types of texts and literary forms for my students. And you'll see here that these are all definitely picture books, but you absolutely can use information texts, nonfiction texts, small passages from other texts with your students, even in kindergarten. So what is an interactive read aloud? Really, it is a whole group lesson where the educator is reading aloud from a teacher-selected text with an expectation that the students will engage with the text through thought exercises and conversation. And if you're sitting there thinking like, okay, but what's the difference between just reading a book and one that's interactive? It really comes down to that strategic intentionality where I am, as the teacher, strategically planning for those opportunities for students to interact with the text. Chances are you might be doing this and you didn't know it had a real title, like it has a thing, and that's great. So we'll be going through all of those. And to be honest, both types of reading happen in my classroom. There are times when I have a few minutes left in the day, I'm waiting for that prep teacher to come and we just pick a book off the shelf and reread, right? What I'm talking about here and what we're talking about with interactive read-alouds is that strategic planning of that. So how do these read-alouds fit with the new curriculum? If you haven't had a chance to look at the new curriculum, there are some major changes and some not so major changes. One of the things that has changed is that we're no longer referring, or we won't be referring to the 4 frames. They are now calling them strands. And you'll see that the demonstrating literacy and math behaviors is now called Foundations of Language and Mathematics. The other 3 have pretty much stayed the same, but when we look at their specific expectations, things have changed there. And this comes directly from the ministry website, that specific expectations identify a range of ways in which students might reveal or apply learning. They are intended to assist educators in observing and describing the range of knowledge and the understanding of concepts, skills, and strategies that students demonstrate as they make progress in their learning in relation to the overall expectations. So again, not a lot of change there from the current curriculum or the current program, but what you'll see as we get into, they are much more explicit and clear in what the learning that we should be looking for, especially in Foundations of Language and Mathematics. So let's get into it a little bit more. So when we look at strand A, we'll see that we've got an oral and nonverbal communication specific expectation. And here we have their listening and responding, using language conventions and nonverbal communication. And this one I really like, that vocabulary piece, understanding and using new words and develop morphological awareness. This is something that is new sort of in the way that they're explaining themselves. And what I like about this, when you look back to that rope, you can see that it is directly related to these sections of the reading rope. So we definitely have the vocabulary and the language structure literally written in the new kindergarten program. This is small. I'm not expecting you to read it. But what this is a real deep dive into the front matter. And so there is a link that MJ is going to be putting in the chat if you haven't looked at the front matter of the new document either, where they really get into vocabulary. And what's really interesting for me and what I find really important is that the new document really highlights the importance of developing vocabulary and what it looks like. They talk about the tiers of vocabulary as well as word learning strategies, and they specifically name morphology as a word learning, an important word learning element. When we get a little bit deeper into A3, which is the understanding and responding to text, you can see here that this is fairly aligned to the curriculum that moves into grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. And so as a teacher who's currently teaching beyond kindergarten, I really appreciate this because I like to see that scope and sequence. I like to see how what is related in the previous grade is coming into this grade and so on and so forth. And you can see a lot of familiar ideas here. The idea that they are identifying what, the purpose of choosing text, they're applying their knowledge of words and sentence structure and punctuation, they're reading and understanding simple text, the background knowledge, their knowledge of words and grammar. They're expressing their personal thoughts and feelings about text, as well as making predictions, using background knowledge, and again, making the connections to a variety of texts. So again, when we think about interactive read-alouds and we think about skilled reading, you can see that all of those elements of that specific expectation, again, are mirrored in Scarborough's reading rope. So we are really leading our students now towards that skilled reading. We can actually go beyond the two literacy, the literacy strands too. And when we look at belonging and contributing, here are some of the specifics there that we want them to be understanding perspectives of Canadian identity. We want them to be thinking about people and communities, as well as responding to art and art forms. And again, these are all things that we can highlight their learning, we can highlight their understanding through interactive read-alouds. So it's not just the very language specific strands where an interactive read-aloud is going to support their learning. So let's get into a little bit more about the basics of an interactive read-aloud. So we've already talked about how an interactive read-aloud in kindergarten is really when a teacher is using a book that they have chosen, and they have times where they are actively engaging their students in the vocabulary, in the sounds, in the ideas of that text. And really central to this point is the text that you choose, right? We want to make sure that we are selecting a text that really is going to meet the needs of our students. This is not an exhaustive list. It comes from the book you see here, Strive for Five, which I will be talking about a little bit more later on. But you want to make sure that when you are selecting a text to read to your students for the purpose of an interactive read-aloud, that you are really checking to make sure that they have several vocabulary words that you can use. Sorry, my basement is very dry. We want to make sure that there's a coherent structure. That's not to say that you can't use a book that has a less coherent structure, but for young students, it is easier to start with that type of text. You want to make sure that if you are using a book that has facts in it, that the facts are actually accurate. And you will be surprised that sometimes that is not exactly the case. And you can also think about using that text to help build background knowledge. So thinking about the ways that you might support inquiry learning or topics that you are working on with your class, and choosing stories that are related to that. Thinking about any social emotional learning that you might be promoting in your classroom, and choosing texts that will support that. And of course, most importantly, choosing a text that is culturally relevant and responsive to the students in your classroom. You want to make sure that they can see themselves represented in the text, and that they see themselves doing positive things and having positive interactions. So sorry, getting a little happy there. So again, when we're thinking about that text selection, it's also okay to think about their own student interests and needs. I told you at the beginning that sometimes I let the kids pick the book, and that's a way to bring in that excitement. Again, we want to think about the vocabulary, choosing books that have different styles or formats. We want to make sure that there's a lot of variety in the language structures that are used. And again, thinking about using those narrative texts. So those texts that are primarily made for entertaining the reader, the texts that are there for informational purposes, or actually today, what I'm going to be showing you is a dual purpose genre that has both a narrative as well as some facts. Again, thinking about all of those curriculum connections, thinking about other subject areas, other like science or mathematics or engineering, but also thinking within language about syntax, about morphemes and phonemes. Like those are selecting texts where those ideas are repeated can be helping them. You can also think about like, how can the text that I'm going to be showing them be related to their writing development? Can I use it in a way to help them with their writing? Another thing that you might think about, and Una sort of hinted at this at the beginning, was this idea of using a text set. So this quote comes from Know Better, Do Better, which is not specifically a kindergarten support text, but there's a lot of great stuff in there. And it says that reading a series of text on a topic grows more knowledge than a series of texts on different topics. And so when we think about text sets, it really is just a collection of intentionally grouped texts and media. It could be movies, it could be books, it could be newspaper articles, but also obviously the picture books, those things from Epic, all of those things I've already shown you that are all around a specific topic that might be related to science or social studies, thinking about those topics as they relate to kindergarten. And the idea is that you are collecting a whole bunch of these texts so that you can support their background knowledge and you can support the vocabulary. This is a sample that I did for my grade 1 class when we were doing the unit on daily changes and weather. It's absolutely relevant for kindergarten as you're investigating your surroundings and your outside learning environment. And what was really interesting to me when I started using this text set approach is that it was really great for my MLL learners. So I teach in Stouffville, which is a suburb of Toronto. We have a very mixed population. I do have a lot of students in my class who are learning English as a second or third language. And so they're coming to school with a smaller bank of words, especially academic words or words that are related to specific content areas. And using these text sets, what I found was interesting, especially with those learners, is the connections that they were independently learning because that vocabulary was being repeated and the examples were being repeated over and over again in different ways. Another thing that's great about text sets is that they really help to build that perspective taking, the critical thinking. So you can explore the same topic from different perspectives and in different ways. So when we're talking about community and what you saw in that text set that will be yours if you fill out that survey, is that you are able to see rural communities as well as urban communities, communities that look different than your own, as well as ones that look similar to yourself. So it's really, oh boy, hang on one second. This is always happens. It's something to definitely think about, creating a text set that's going to allow kids to think about the topic and build their knowledge on the topic. Once you know what you want to teach and you know the book you're going to use, the next important thing to think about is that vocabulary. What are the words that you want to do? Now, there's so many benefits to thinking about vocabulary acquisition and thinking about how we're going to build those vocabulary words with young children. And interactive read-alouds are a great way to do that. They expose them to that rich tier 2 vocabulary. It allows them to grasp meaning of words naturally. We can see how words are used in sentences. We can think about that explicit vocabulary instruction. It's an opportunity to intentionally teach those words. You can pre-teach the vocabulary. You can give those definitions and clarify in context. You're also giving them the opportunity for multiple meaningful contexts. So you're getting them to hear the words, you're seeing the words in context, you're getting the teacher explanations. They might be visible in the illustrations to help you. You've also got this opportunity for the active student engagement, right? So with using those vocabularies inside that story, they can ask and answer questions with that vocabulary. Again, all of this is giving them the opportunities to develop their oral language, again, in context of the story. It gives you the opportunity for visual and prosodic support. So the idea that you can use your own gestures and facial expressions and the way that your tone of voice, I often slow down as I get to the word, or I will overly emphasize the word. And it gives them the opportunity to transfer the learning of that word into other reading and writing tasks because they're seeing it so often. When we think about explicit vocabulary instruction, we cannot teach all the words, right? So MJ's going to pop in the chat here. There's a great article that we have on the ONlit website called Which Words to Teach, or it's some topic is similar to that, by Andrew Bymiller. And it goes really through the clarity of at every age group. So kindergarten, primary years, junior, intermediate, what are the types of words that we should be teaching our students? And generally what you're going to see is that most of these word lists, are sort of broken up into tiers. So in tier 1, we have those basic words, which are really the common words, the words that they don't really need direct instruction on because they hear them all the time. They're probably going to learn it incidentally. Then you've got that tier 2, those academic words that are a little bit more advanced. They might be sort of precise in that in the definition in their context. They might have multiple meanings. These are words like disappoint or competition. They're words that really do carry the meaning of the phrase. And so it's really important that they understand those words. And of course, you have content specific. Those are the very academic words like related to mathematics or science or engineering that are important for them to learn, but they're not typical to see in like a narrative text. And their definitions might be more precise and academic compared to those in the tier 2. And so a lot of the research supports that we should be focusing a lot of our instruction on those tier 2 words. That is reflected in the curriculum document also. If you're new to this type of learning about vocabulary, Christopher Such has a great book about the art and science of teaching primary reading, and he has a word list. That word list also lives in the ONlit resource library, which MJ can put in the chat for you. It's a great sort of primer on the types of words that we should be teaching our kids. And once we know what types of words we want to be teaching them, we need to really think about like how we're going to teach them. Like what's the way that we're going to be doing that? We want to make sure that we are choosing the words that are important to understand the book. Again, they're those content specific. They're highly useful for the kids. They're words that they're going to come in contact with again and again. And if at the end of this, you're still not sure, there is a website called Achieve the Core, and it's the academic word finder. And maybe you're nodding silently in your house somewhere being like, yeah, that's a good website. You just type in the passages, tell the grade that you want, and it will pop up words and definitions with kid-friendly definitions for you to really help you start to get in the habit of seeing the words for yourself. There's a lot of great tools out there that will help you determine which words should be taught. So thinking about this quote, vocabulary and knowledge are powerful determinants of children's comprehension and success in school. Content-rich vocabulary instruction focuses on building word knowledge during meaningful learning experiences. And I think that what this quote highlights really is that core idea that vocabulary is not just about memorizing definitions. Vocabulary is really what drives the understanding and the learning, especially when it's taught in context and it's tied to those rich classroom experiences. This quote comes from The Power of Content-Rich Vocab, which is another great article available for you through the chat link there. And what I particularly like about this article is that it's not just about the why, but they do give us the how. So when we look at this, we're seeing that in order to provide those content-rich vocabulary instruction, one of the things that you could do is create that rich oral language environment. So include those activities that promote the vocabulary development, such as reading aloud from an informational text as well as fiction. The act of reading to your students is that beginning step in providing that content-rich vocabulary. Thinking about it from a weekly point of view, the vocabulary that you want to teach from the read-alouds, as well as the content that you are teaching. Pre-selecting these words and really thinking about the intentionality of how you're going to bring those into your teaching every week. Thinking again, step number 3 here is the introduce those selected words and explain the word meanings using child-friendly definitions. You want to make sure, this is a really important one, that the students say the words aloud. That actually helps them to store the sound in the word in their memories. And so that, again, we're wanting that active engagement, not just that passive listening of that. Thinking again about the creating those opportunities for the children to review and practice the new vocabulary in the meaningful context. And then, of course, monitoring their progress. You want to be watching and listening to see if the kids are able to use those new words that you've been teaching them. I always like to joke that no ONlit presentation is complete without an Anita Archer. So what we have here is her vocabulary instruction. So if you are a person who likes to learn by seeing, on the ONlit website, you can actually watch Anita Archer do a vocabulary instruction with children in front of her. She does it with older kids, but I still found it really inspiring to see the way that she keeps everybody at that perky pace and she gets everybody going. And the way that she does her vocabulary instruction is she talks about introducing the word's pronunciation. They need to know how the word sounds. Then we're thinking about the meaning of that word. She illustrates the words both with examples and non-examples. So it's just as important to show them what the word means as well as what the word does not mean. And these, of course, are done in really student-friendly language, and it completely depends on the age. She's then checking for the student's understanding. There's so many different ways to teach vocabulary, but what you really want to make sure that you are doing is that you are keeping that bond of the phonology and the orthography and the meaning together as you teach that word and as you introduce that word. So those are really important pieces for it. One thing that Anita Archer is very, very big on is that active engagement in the choral responses. So choral responses was something, a little personal checklist that I really wanted to get ahead on last year after talking with ONlit team member Laura Bross. And I really just was sick of the hands up. And this was a big change to have kids constantly talking at you. But I promise you, if you follow some of the tips, you will get there in a very controlled way and it will be less chaotic. It's always funny to me when a supply teacher or a prep teacher comes into my room and they ask my students a question and every single child is answering, because that's what I've trained them to do, is that active engagement. There's no hands up happening in my classroom unless I specifically ask for it. But when we think about the choral responses and that active engagement, there's a couple of reasons why it's so profound and so important for students. One, again, like I said, it's that active participation. All of the students respond at the same time. There's not just volunteers. The kids in my class know that they are expected to be participating in the lesson and that they need to be engaging. It really helps keep high risk, it keeps the engagement high and it reduces that off-task behavior. So the kids, again, who are maybe prone to doing other things, know to be in my attention. They know I'm expecting their attention as well as their engagement. It gives you the opportunity to provide that feedback immediately. So if I am asking a very direct question that has a closed answer, like what color are the shoes, and if they're red, but somebody says blue, I can very immediately hear and see who it's going to be. Now, I will admit that this is different in a grade 1 class where I have 20 students versus 28 or 30 in a kindergarten class. But when I went in last week to work with this teacher on the book that I'm going to show you, very quickly I was able to get them in the pace of doing it and hearing their answers right away with very minimal instruction. Choral responses are also important because they do support learning for all students, right? All of the students are expected. This is really especially helpful for struggling learners because they are going to hear the responses of the peers around them that are often going to have the correct answers. Again, for our English language learners, it's modeling that proper language for the English constructs of what they are supposed to be doing. For students who lack confidence, right? The ones who never put their hand up, but you know they have the answer, when their voices are part of that chorus, you can see that they're participating, and you can sort of get that feedback to them as well. It allows them the opportunity to practice without that fear of singled out. Again, it's not useful for every single type of question, and Anita Archer really goes through that. These are great for when you have short answers that are the same answers for every single person, and the answer is already known or taught, which is why they're perfect for when we are doing vocabulary definitions. They're great for phonics lessons, steps in a process. These are perfect times for doing that. Again, you need to have a clear signal. In my class, there's two. I will point at them. I also say, think about it, 1, 2, 3. They know. Anita Archer's always using her hand. And if you were at the conference a couple years ago, she had us all just literally eating out of the palm of her hand. Every time she talked to us, we were saying something. So really thinking about the clear signals that you are going to use for your students. My students have a signal for when I want their hands up, right? Hands up one at a time. Those are the types of things they know that it is a time to put their hands up. But if I say, oh, okay, think about it, 1, 2, 3, they know that I'm expecting a choral response. Of course, none of this happens unless you do give them the think time that they needed, right? So if you're asking a question, it is really important to stop and wait and give them the time that they need to do it. So thinking about today, we're going to be talking a lot about measurement. You all have your mics off. You do not need to unmic for this, but I'm going to give you the example. When I point at you, it's when I want you to use the word measure. So I want you to imagine that we're working on the word measure, and I'm telling you, I'm going to go through it with you. And anytime I point at you, the word is measure. Measure means to find out how long, how big, how heavy, or how full something is using numbers and tools. When I want to find out how long something is, I need to measure it. Very good. I can measure the length of my foot using snap cubes. Una said her licorice is longer than mine because she measured it. So you can see it's a very simple activity. We come back to it time and time again with the kids, but just bringing in that interaction, they've just said the word several times to help them understand the word in context. I also like to have a visual. Again, I've completely lifted this from Laura Bross, an ONlit team member, with her permission. She creates these lovely little placard flashcardy things. She keeps them outside of her door. She has them on her board. They're all over the room for the kids to remember. And she uses a program called Flat Icon. There's a free version, there's a paid version. I just use the free version, and it's very simplified visuals that you can attach into your definition. So you can see again here, I'm using the word measure and compare, and I just typed them into the website and was able to come up, select a picture that matched what I thought the kids were going to use. Using this visual, it's helpful for all students, but again, thinking about your MLL learners who are learning these words for the first time, potentially, having that visual there just enhances that the learning of that word. Other ways to bring in that explicit vocabulary instruction, again, inserting that short phrase or that sentence. So in my class, we always use the same thing. Again, we just did 3D shapes before the break. And so one of the things that we did was 2D shapes are flat, and 3D shapes take up space. And we were doing that over and over and over again. Every time we were talking about shapes or solids, we were using that. I really like a gesture. I really like a dramatic gesture. Fasteners is something that we're learning right now, what a fastener is. And all I have to do is this. If I put my hands out to the side right now, the kids in my class will go, fasteners hold things together, right? So making it fun, making it engaging. They've got that dramatic gesture. You're using your voice. You're using that inflection. You're varying the pace of the words. Those things all together are really going to help bring the vocabulary to the forefront of your lessons. And all of this can be done when we're thinking about our interactive read-alouds, right? Picking the words from the books and then doing these lessons. So research has demonstrated that the most effective read-alouds are those in which children are actively involved in asking questions and making predictions rather than passively listening. And so when we think about that interactive read-aloud, I've just shown you all the ways to teach the words, but really we want them engaged in all elements of the story. So thinking about Strive for 5 conversations, we did do it's a shameless plug, I feel like. We did do a book study on this last year, going through the book chapter by chapter. We've also had Sonia Cabell on Reading Road Trip for the IDA podcast a couple times. But this book is a really great framework. If you're new to talking to young children, or you want to increase and get more out of your conversations with young children, this is a great book for that. And essentially what's happening here is the research that they did was that most teachers are engaging in conversations with young people that just happen to have 2 to 3 turns, right? The teacher says something, the student says something, and then teacher says, okay, great, moving on. I've done that so many times. Guilty. But the idea here is that if we extend it to 5 turns, that's extra back and forth, then we will have greater outcomes for learners on their language, their oral language, as well as their language comprehension. And the way that it looks like, if you see a conversation like this, what happened on this page? They're mad. Okay, great. Now we're moving to the next student, right? We've all done that. We got 47 seconds before this lesson implodes. We want to keep moving on. That's happened. But if we could just stretch it a little bit. Yes, she's very angry, says the teacher. How do you think she should have acted when she got upset? We're re-engaging that same student. She should have used her words. I agree. She could have made a better choice by using words instead of kicking the tower. In that extra turn, those extra 2 turns, we were able to get a little bit more information out of that student on in terms of their comprehension of the story. Do they have any way of backing up why they think they were mad? We were also able to then clarify for the kid, yeah, you're right, you're on this great track, and you're giving them that real-time feedback. This only takes a few seconds, but it does require a little bit of thinking. And it's really this third turn where the magic happens, right? When you initially ask your student a question and they get that answer, you as the teacher in that moment can decide, do I need to scaffold down or scaffold up? So when we think about downward scaffold, this is for students who are not answering the question properly, right? It's a little bit muddled in how they are understanding. You don't think they quite get it. We can use these scaffolds from minimal to intense to really support their learning. Likewise, we can scaffold up. If the student gives you the correct answer right away, it doesn't have to be over. Push their thinking a little bit more. Ask them other types of questions to really get their thinking going in that upwards direction. The book, oh, I'm going trigger happy here. The book is great at providing lots of questions. We've been asking questions of our students for many, many years, right? We do understand that. But when we think about pushing along this continuum and really trying to get into that inferring and explaining category, that model of going back and forth with the same student is really helpful for doing that. Other ways that we can boost that comprehension with our students is retelling or dramatizing the story, getting them again to read several books on that same topic in that text set, playing with objects that are related to the concept and characters in the story, modeling that teacher talk and the thinking as we go. And all of this is coming from a great article on reading rockets that MJ can put in the chat for us there. But a lot of great tips in that article on how we can be improving the comprehension and effective questioning with interactive read-alouds. And the last one there you see there is repeated readings on the same story. And what I mean by that is reading the same book multiple times across a cycle of 4 or 5 days. This, again, is sort of a new concept for some of us. Maybe many of you have been doing it for years, but I certainly wasn't. And last year was a big game changer for me. There are so many benefits to rereading a story multiple times. We know it invites their active participation because they become more comfortable with the content every time we read it. Again, that's going to engage all of those learners. It's going to expand their oral language development because they're hearing the words over and over again, strengthening that story sense, fostering that fluency as you are seeing the words multiple times. And once again, this is a great way of supporting your multilingual learners. It was a game changer with seeing the interaction of my MLL learners on subsequent reads. So they may have been sitting there the first time, not engaging too much, but on the second or third read, they had ideas, they had thoughts that they wanted to share with me. And if that doesn't convince you, it also means less planning. And anytime that I can support teachers in planning less, but more deeply, I'm all for it. You've got the one text and you're thinking about how you're going to hit on that text multiple times across the cycle instead of finding lots and lots of different books. I was able to go a lot deeper instead of wider with what I was doing. Multiple reads happen in many different ways. For the most part, on the first read, we're just reading it and going through the vocabulary. On that second read, I'm going a little bit deeper into that story sense. I'm always setting a new purpose. I want them to figure something out new about the text. This time I read the book, I want you to think about why Little Red Riding Hood needed to disobey her mother so deeply. On the subsequent read, on that third read, I will get them to tell me the story as I go through it. Again, able to see their sense of story. I'm always connecting it with another activity as well. So, looking at the time here, I always yap way longer than I think I'm going to. I really want to get into these pieces for you. This is the book that I chose to do. Again, I'm a grade 1 teacher, but I wanted to work with a kindergarten teacher. So I went straight down the hall and asked who wanted to be working with me. The teacher I was working with, she's really into math. It is her lovely passion. So she was really focusing on some math concepts. It was also the only time of the day that I could come in was during the time that she was doing math. And I didn't want to mess up her day in any way. So we chose this story. It connected to what they were doing. We were able to look at the goals were looking at the vocabulary. I also wanted to provide them the opportunities to practice measuring in real as well as contrived contexts. And of course, we wanted to practice using those vocabularies in context. And when we think about the text itself, so this is a book called Measuring Penny by Lorene Leedy. There's a lot of pros to it. It was related to the other learning that they were doing, like I said, around math and community. There was diverse representation in the story. I knew many of the students in the class would be able to see themselves reflected on the page. It's also really relatable. A kid gets homework assigned to them, and she uses her dog and goes around the community and measures her dog. The cons with this book were it was an unconventional plot, right? It wasn't really following a beginning, middle, end. It did use US measurements. I was focusing mostly on the non-standard units at this point, so it wasn't super problematic, but if you're thinking about older grades, it could be an issue. And the story was actually a bit too long. So I just ended up stopping. Some of the back issues we had here was when we were supposed to do it, I was going to be in there multiple times across the week. But of course, as life gets busy, my kids were sick, her kids were sick. We couldn't work the timing out. We had, prep teachers cancel, all of the things that always happened. And then the day that I actually was able to go in, it was following an indoor recess. And those of you in that kindergarten class on an indoor recess day, you know that I was not set up for immediate success, but we still got through it. Thinking about the cross-curricular connections with this story, of course, the math is glaring, right? This again is coming from the new curriculum, the measurement, the comparing and the describing. Like compare is actually a word in the document. So it was a great book word for me to look at. Thinking about the vocabulary, we were using measure, measurements, and compare. These are the ones I actually put on the wall for them. Again, my focus was on having the kids explain the word, what the word means, clarifying if they were wrong, and summarizing it in kid-friendly language, introducing the gesture. So for measure, we were always doing measure, how long, how heavy. We just changed it. Compare, we were doing this. And if you have a 6-7 thing happening, then I don't recommend that one, but that's what we did. So every time we did compare, we're like, ooh, compare, because it matched our photo. We really wanted the kids and the teachers, the other educators in the room, to use those words in context. So handy tip, maybe you do this already. This is my actual book. I put sticky notes because I'm going to blow through and forget where I'm supposed to be. So I have the sticky notes of the words at the back. On the pages where I want to stop, it says right in there what I need to be doing. And the kids are used to it. I just pull it over to the side and get going. So you can see some of the questions that I wanted to ask. These are not students of my own, so I didn't have specific kids I wanted to hit on or ask questions from. So we were doing it. A lot of it was choral response, but some of the times they did have their hands up for specific questions. Thinking about it being a play-based program, of course, the link from this text, the way that we were using the vocabulary and learning about this text was through their play-based learning. So you can see here, we've got a lot of giant little pennies. So the book is about a Boston Terrier. So I had a little Boston Terrier for them. We've got the Boston Terrier there you see on the screen, just printed and put in sleeves with a lot of different loose parts for them to measure. We've got the balance scales going with other animals. We've got them, again, with loose parts to sort of see the different masses. We were also, I really like giving kids the book, like to see what they do with the book when they have it in their physical hands. And the kids themselves started putting their hands down and comparing. Well, let's measure. Oh, my hand is bigger than this paw, or this paw is longer than my hand. These are things that happened organically. Another thing that happened organically is they started taking the sleeves around the room and finding other objects. They were like, it happened to be a stuffy day, so they were taking different stuffies and measuring them against the little dog in the sleeve. And what I want to show you here, it's a little video of me working with one of the kids, and he was telling me what he figured out. Ready?
It's the same size.
How do you know it's the same size?
Because it's reaching the ear.
Yeah, and you put this at the same time?
Yeah.
When you compare them, is there anything that's the same about them when you compare them?
They both have eyes.
They do both have eyes. Very good.
Let's compare.
But what I particularly like about that video too, you can hear that back and forth. You can hear me saying the word compare, but that at the end there, you see the other educators in the room. It was actually a parent helper who comes in, a volunteer that comes in, and she got the memo right away. She was taking kids from around the room. Let's compare that idea of using that. So we also have, of course, the ability to bring in writing. So if you're thinking about kindergarten, I'm new on my Think SRSD, that self-regulated strategy development. I'm working towards it. This book didn't lend itself great to that, and plus I didn't have a lot of time. But what we were able to do, I had just a very simple sheet with the penny dog, that same dog in the middle, and just out for them with some crayons to see what was happening. And you can see Penny is outside. It says the girl is hugging, right? She was hugging her. So another way, ideally, you're going to reinforce those vocabulary pieces with them, but this is what the kids came up with on their own in that short time. There's lots of other things that I wanted to do. Like I said, I wasn't able to get in there as often as I wanted to, but this idea of comparing, using that language, a simple, not a worksheet, but a simple way of recording their thinking, again, is those two boxes and having them draw or write or label two different objects in the room and then talking about it. Another thing that I really loved when I was teaching kindergarten was the dramatic play center. And so measuring all of the stuffed animals and measuring things around the classroom, that's a skill that happens in doctors' offices and veterinarians' offices all the time. And so another way that you could bring in that measurement and bring in the idea of increasing the vocabulary is using a sheet like this. You could just pop it into a dry erase sleeve. You've got the animals, and then they could take their actual measurements, right? They could ask the owner, what age is it? They could weigh them on a scale. They could check the length with a ruler or with non-standard units. You could talk about the different pieces, right? So there's lots of different ways that you can then take that language or the purpose of that interactive read aloud and bring it into all of the areas of play in the kindergarten classroom. So, thinking about it all, we know that reading to kids is a powerful instructional move because it increases that language comprehension, vocabulary, that overall knowledge about the world. And we know that interactive read alouds also provide that purpose, that intentional structure where you can engage in the meaningful conversation about the text, as well as improve the understanding of text form and structure. And lastly, with that interactive read aloud, you can really model the meaningful uses of those comprehension strategies that were listed in the curriculum, as well as those skills. Ideally, in a perfect world, I would have gone in a couple more times with that text, and I would have been able to show you all of the other ways on the subsequent reads. I had also wanted to go in with a more traditional text to show you how you might think about the story elements. But I think that you've got a clear enough picture here.
So Melissa, I don't know if you can see the chat or if you want me to fire them to you. But do you have any thoughts? There's a question around real books or digital books for read alouds. Any thoughts there? Anything that comes to mind?
My preference always goes to real books, but I totally recognize that we can't always buy the book that we need if it's not available at the library or your public library. So where possible, I will look at the public library. I am in the small town of Uxbridge, but we have a phenomenal library and almost always has what I need is almost there. I will also look in the school library. If I'm on a no book buying thing for this year because I purchased so many. If you only have options for listening to them having a digital book would be great because you're controlling the pace of going through it. So if you are able to download books, I know the Libby app and the Aura app, a lot of those times you can use those on your computers and you're controlling how you're going through the text. That's that's fine. If the only option is somebody doing a read aloud, it's your only option. The things to think about is how are you going to manage the kids going back into the book? Like you want to give them the opportunity to go back and revisit. I would also think to be very careful about who you choose to read the books. I love it when authors read the books themselves. Reading Rainbow does a great job of pairing famous people with the right book. That's another thing to think about. Somebody from the community that the book you are about reading the book is also a great way to do it. Libby and Aura. are the two that someone just said about the apps. So yes, reading to your kids. If the only way that you have is a YouTube read aloud, that's better than no book at all. Absolutely. Having the book is the best choice, but it is definitely that scale there. But it's anything that you can do to get those ideas to your kids, the better. I often sometimes, if I was doing this book last year called what is it called? Oh, anyway, it's evaded me. But I read it. I read it twice, but then I also got the videos of other people reading it so they can hear different intonations as well. It's a really great way of doing it.
Fantastic. I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. So if anybody has any last lingering questions for Melissa, now's your time. Lots of love and appreciation for your work in preparing this webinar, Melissa.
It's funny, I went into that kindergarten class. I was in there for about 35 minutes, and kindergarten is very much a muscle you have to work all of the time. It was, woo, there's a lot going on in those classes. So the kindergarten educators, you are doing amazing things every day in those classes.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions popping up in the chat, but I know, Melissa, you have a slide that just reminds everybody that there are many wonderful ways that you can get in contact with us. So please don't hesitate. You know, we continue to offer our info line, info@onlit.org, where we have a lovely collection of wonderful, fabulous Ontario educators who can happily chat with you one-on-one. Melissa so kindly makes herself available. You'll see some of her social handles and also her email as well. So please don't hesitate to stay in touch. We would be completely happy to continue the conversation and support your work in any way we can. And Melissa, any closing words to send us out?
Just read to your kids. They love it. It's the best thing you can do. And try that repeated reading. I think you'll come around on it. It's really a great thing. And you think they're going to be bored. You think you're going to be bored. But every time I do a repeated reading, the kids see something in the text that I, who have read the book now 6 or 7 times, never saw. So it's a really great thing to try with your students.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. Please stay in touch, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.